Hello and welcome to the R380, what should we call it, introduction video. So a bit of an introduction into the R380 Gearbox, a bit of history about it, how to identify them, some of the common points of failure and wear on them, a little bit of talk about suffixes, upgrades that we do to them, and just to give you a bit of general idea about what R380 you need and what might be some good choices to make when ordering one from us. So it's going to be quite a long video, but for those of you who are interested, I think you'll find it quite useful. And yeah, enjoy. Here we've got one of our R380s built on the bench, on the packaging bench. And right here on this little plate is where we have the identification number. You might just be able to see, let me readjust the camera, there we go. That's 68A, and then we've got a few other numbers. And finally, we've got the suffix right at the end. This one's an L. So the first three, the 68A, will tell you what vehicle it was from originally. The rest of the numbers don't mean a great deal to us. And the last letter, in this case an L, is the suffix. So this is a suffix L, the latest suffix gearbox that the R380 was produced in. So it's got all the upgrades that Land Rover gave it from the factory in its final years of production. The first three we can't really rely on too much because most R380s have been rebuilt at some point in their life. So the casing may have been taken from another gearbox, it might be from a Discovery, it might be from a Defender, it might be from a Range Rover Sport, but this one is a suffix L late subbies, and we can also tell that because it's got the double ribbed main casing as well, which you won't find on a J suffix, which is the early suffix. And here they are. On the side of the gearbox, that's the Selector from the Defender type. On the side here, we've got the oil manifold, which takes the oil from the oil pump into the main box. Well, from the main box into the oil pump, which pumps it along the main shaft, feeding the gears. Now, this can be removed, and an oil cooler can be fit right here. Some rest of world Defenders had them from standard, but most with an oil cooler have been upgraded. Pioneer do a really nice oil cooler kit. Now, the pros and cons to an oil cooler on an R380 are, well, let's start with the pros. It will keep your gearbox running cooler, which is a really good idea when you're running in hot climates or really working your Defender hard. But the danger is if you don't install it correctly, if you don't pay particular attention to where you're routing the pipes and that all the fittings and clips and what have you are really nice and snug. The oil pump, as you can see on the back here, will pump your gearbox dry of oil within a minute. So if you are fitting a cooler, make sure that it is properly installed, routed the best possible place it could be, where it's free from being snagged or being damaged in any way, shape or form. Because the last thing you want, and you won't get any warning, is your gearbox will seize up, run out of oil and seize up very, very quickly. So next thing we're going to look at is how to identify the difference between a Defender R380 and a Discovery R380. So here we are in the graveyard where all R380s come to be reborn. And if we have a look at the top of this one, you can see that it is from a Discovery. The Discovery has got a different selector to the Defender. It's actually got this little ball type yoke in here. And you will know straight away by taking the top off your Defender, your R380, that is from a Discovery. This is from a Defender. It's got this horseshoe type selector lever on there. All Defenders had that. The little ball yoke type that we showed you a minute ago is fitted to all Discoveries 1 and 2 and to Range Rover Classics that run an R380 as well. But this horseshoe type is from the Defender. There is an adapter you can get to turn a Discovery into a Defender. You remove this little 5mm grub screw on there, pull that yoke off, and you can take that off, and there's a little adapter that Synchro Gearboxes sell and Ashcroft that will turn a Discovery R380 into a Defender type. You can't turn a Defender into a Discovery, only the other way around, Discovery to Defender. The selector rail is completely different length, so it can only be done that way round. So, input shafts and various suffixes. I don't know if you can see on here, but we've got a selection of input shafts. So the first one we're going to look at is the Stumpy input shaft. So this is the input shaft we use when we're building a Stumpy R380. And the Stumpy R380, as mentioned earlier, is a direct replacement for the LT77 gearbox fitted in the 200 TDIs. So we can build a gearbox that is a perfect direct swap for the 200 TDI gearboxes. The next is the 300 TDI input shaft. Stop it falling off the bench. And here is a TD5 input shaft. So you can see that the TD5 is quite longer than the 300 TDI input shaft. Here we've got a V8 input shaft. The V8 input shaft is the same length as the 300 TDI, just with a different spigot diameter. So this actually takes a different spigot bush in the flywheel, the same length, and it's designed for the Rover V8 engines. So let's just have a look at those spigot shafts again. Now we've got the verniers here. You can see that a 300 TDI measures just over 22mm, and a TD5 is the same. And the only one that differs is the V8, which is 19mm. So that's the differences there in terms of spigot shafts. The Stumpy is also the same as the 300 TDI and the TD5. So that's the 4 main input shafts. There are other variations, MPI and other R380s that went in other vehicles, but in terms of Land Rovers, really, they are the 4 TD5, 300 TDI, V8 and Stumpy R380. Now we're going to have a look at the different suffix variations. So the TD5 shaft here is a suffix K and L. I'll talk about K and L in general. And here's a suffix J. As you can see, it's got a much narrower pinion. So that was one of the upgrades that they did. They did do a 300 TDI K and L, and you can use a K and L gearbox to build a 300 TDI. We always use them for the heavy duty boxes. Here we've got the lay gears. These are the same tooth count, J and K and L. The K and L again is a much fatter lay shaft, a much stronger thing. A wider body on it. Like I say, the tooth counts are identical, unless we're going to go and start looking at all the options of the V8 lay gears and what have you, but generally we just tend to use this lay gear for our K and Ls and the one on the left for the J's. Another significant upgrade was the main shaft. The main shaft in the suffix J was prone for snapping, prone for wearing, and that was improved in the suffix K and L by fitting a thicker main shaft and a longer splined main shaft as well, which took out the stress point where the end of the output shaft was prone for snapping. If we have a look at the length, you'll see that the length of splines on the suffix J is considerably shorter than they are on the suffix K and L. So that really was a worthwhile upgrade to the suffix K and L R380 gearboxes. There's also bigger bearings fitted. Bigger bearings on the pinion, just here, and on the lay gear as well. Had a bigger bearing just here. So a good overall improvement with the suffix K and Ls. We only use K and Ls for heavy duty upgrades. We'd never use a suffix J for a heavy duty build. Now, here we've got the components laid out, ready to assemble one. So I'm going to show you what goes into an R380 as standard on every single build we do. But before we do that, I'll just tell you again, which I've mentioned in other videos, what builds a good R380 or a good gearbox. It's not necessarily as easy as just chucking all new components into them. In fact, throwing loads of new components in can sometimes build a bad R380. When we've had a lay gear or a pinion, or any of the gears for that matter, that have been running together for hundreds of thousands of miles, well, tens of thousands of miles, sometimes hundreds of thousands of miles. They form a relationship with each other. Now, if the parts have been well serviced, well oiled, they're in absolutely no reason why we can't use them again. As long as we're not wearing through the case hardening and the shafts are in real good condition, there's absolutely no reason why we can't use them again and they'll not do another 100,000 miles. But having a lay gear that's done 100,000 miles with its mate, let me grab one, Mr. Pinion, over all these miles they've formed a relationship with each other and they've worn to each other and bedded themselves in. If I take that away and put in a brand new shaft into that, there's a good chance that that gearbox could be noisy. Also, if the more new parts we're putting in, the less wear that they've had, and not wear in a bad way that they're wearing out, bedding in we should say. The tolerances end up all over the place. They're all made by different manufacturers now, so trying to set all those tolerances together so that they'll work is just a nightmare. So yeah, we chuck loads of new lay gears in, and we chuck loads of new pinions in, but generally as a rule I like to change them as a pair, and the same with a lot of the gears as well, especially the pinion, because this is the drive gear. This is, every gear is driven through this gear. It's actually fourth gear. It's the first motion shaft, it's called sometimes. So every gear, first, second, third, fourth, fifth and reverse, is all driven through here. So if that's noisy, it's going to be noisy in every gear. So picking a really good core unit to build, to rebuild, is the best practice. We want to find a core unit that has been serviced, had plenty of oil changes, and ideally not drove to within an inch of its life, which is really hard when we're talking Land Rovers, because let's face it, there's not many that have had an easy life. They've all been off-roaded, green lanes, towing heavy trailers. There's very rarely do we find a Land Rover that's done 50,000 miles, had a service every year, and is in supreme condition. And if there was, why would it be here in our workshop for rebuild? So what we do is we strip the gearboxes down, and probably a 2-to-1 ratio is worth a rebuild. There is plenty that are just not good enough for us to rebuild as a total, and those parts go onto the shelf as spare parts, and a lot of the parts get scrapped. So starting off with a really good core unit is the best way to start. So obviously all the bearings are replaced, and taper bearings, we've got a total of 5 taper bearings in there. The little pinion bearing, the big pinion bearing, the main shaft, the lay gear, and the other end of the lay gear. Best brand. We've got some other bearings in there as well. We've got some needle rollers that run on the gears. We use these metal type cage ones. There are a plastic type cage available, but we don't bother with those. We use these metal ones. These are actually NTM, another really good make as well. We've got 4 of those big ones. We've got a reverse needle roller, and we've got a 5th gear needle roller as well. And then right at the back of the gearbox, we've got these block roller support bearings. So we chuck a pair of those in there as well. What else have we got? A new collar bush for the end. That's what seals the R380 and seals the LT230 to it. We've got some thrust washers here, the outer ring for the thrust washers, one circlip, couple of O-rings, new copper washers for the drain plug, and very importantly, seals, Corteco seals. Corteco are genuine seals. You'll often find a Corteco seal that's got a little grind mark on it. That little grind mark is where they've ground off the Land Rover stamp on there. So they are genuine, and they are cheaper than Land Rover's branded Corteco ones, but exactly the same. A new oil pump and a new oil thrower as well. And finally, we've got the synchro rings. 1, 2, 3, 4 of these type ones. These are the triple synchros. They run with these smaller synchros here, and 2 synchro rings for 4th gear and 5th as well. So complete set of synchro rings, complete set of bearings, filter, and depending on the state of the other components, we replace a lot of those as well. Selector forks, selector hubs, reverse gears, we put loads of those in. But as a whole, every single R380 has this set of parts in as standard. Selector forks. These are the softest bit of material in the brass selector forks. Real prone for wearing. Fitting new selector forks when worn is essential. Gives a nice click feeling into gear. So we end up scrapping loads of these and replacing them. And a top tip is don't rest your hand on the gear stick. This guy, whoever he was, loved to rest his hand on the gear stick. Oh, you can see, look at all that wear across there where the selector fork is completely worn away. No surprise, this is 5th gear. 5th gear selector fork. Actually also suffered on 1st and 2nd and 3rd and 4th. So whoever was driving this Land Rover really did like to rest his hand on the gear stick, which will wear your gearbox out much faster. So don't rest your hand on the gear stick. I'm going to have a quick look at the 5th gears in the R380. So this one here is the standard 5th gears that are fitted to the Defender and the Discovery. And these ones here are what's known as the V8 5th gears. So these were standardly fitted to all V8 R380s. And these have actually they're a good upgrade because they're a 5% increase in ratio. So that means that it'll drop your RPM down in 5th gear 5%, which is really beneficial, especially in a Defender with a standard transfer box, with a 1.4 ratio transfer box, because a 1.4 ratio transfer box in a Defender, TDI or TD5, by the time you're getting much past 50-60 mile an hour, you tend to be right at the top of the rev range, and that will reduce that rev range in 5th gear only by 5%. There are other ways to counteract that more aggressively by fitting a 1.2 ratio transfer box, but if you're keeping with the standard 1.4, I think it's always worthwhile picking that V8 5th gear and to get those RPMs down a little bit. Let's face it, most of us are using Defenders now, more on the road than off-road, and when we're cruising on the motorways, what have you, we are real high in those rev range. So let's knock them down a little bit by fitting a V8 5th gear. This R380 we're building here on the rack is a heavy-duty R380. So the upgrades to this are these two bearings. This bearing here and this bearing here. These casings are actually machined out in order to house these bigger bearings. Really good quality bearings as well. Because they are bigger, they need a few other modifications to them. So they've got a bigger oil pump housing. It's the same oil pump internals, but a bigger housing, and we need to fit a bigger housing because we've machined away the material where the standard housing would fit to that. So these bigger bearings are definitely worth upgrading if you are doing long journeys, heavy towing, off-road, really working your Land Rover. You've got a much higher load capacity, and you also get this much more what's the word for it, it's a much improved oil feed ring, which actually sends the oil directly through the lay gear, not the lay gear, the main shaft, sorry, directly through the main shaft, making sure that every bit of oil from the oil pump is forced along the main shaft, oiling all of the needle rollers for the bearings that sit behind all of these gears. thanks for watching. I hope I didn't drone on too long about stuff. Tried to get in as much information as I could in there. I'm sure I've probably missed plenty of bits out. If you've got any questions or any queries, email us or drop a comment in the bottom there and let us know. Hopefully we've been quite helpful with that. Cheers guys.